Victor Wembanyama just took a pay cut. Let that sink in for a sec. The most gifted basketball player on the planet, a 22-year-old generational talent coming off a run to the NBA Finals, sat down with the San Antonio Spurs this offseason and chose to earn less money than he was entitled to. Not because he had to, not because the Spurs forced his hand. He had the full amount sitting right in front of him, and he pushed it away. The NBA world went quiet. Fans wanted to know why. Executives across the league were watching. And then when Wembanyama spoke, what he said about this decision, about what matters more to him than money, says everything about the kind of player he intends to become and exactly what he is trying to build in San Antonio. Because this was not a miscalculation. It was not a mistake. It was a declaration. Stay with us, because once you understand what he actually said and why, you will see exactly why this move could change the entire trajectory of the San Antonio Spurs franchise. Before we get into the contract, you have to understand who Victor Wembanyama is and why his every move carries the weight it does. When the Spurs won the lottery in 2023 and secured the first overall pick, basketball people did not react the way they normally do. There was no debate about whether the team made the right call. There was no argument about whether another prospect might be better. There was only one reaction, and it was unanimous. San Antonio had just landed the most anticipated player to enter the NBA in a generation, maybe longer. When Wembanyama stood 7 feet 4 inches in tall and moved with the fluidity of a guard, he could handle the basketball in the open court, pull up from three-point range, drop defenders with footwork in the post, and then turn around on the other end and alter shots without fouling, protect the rim at an elite level, and switch across every position on the floor. He was not a prospect. He was a phenomenon. Draft analysts who had watched basketball for decades were running out of comparisons. Some called him a unicorn. Others said that was underselling it. He was simply something the game had never seen. He arrived in San Antonio knowing exactly where he had landed. On the night of the draft, he talked about wanting to try the breakfast tacos, wanting to learn Spanish, wanting to embrace the city, but most pointedly, he talked about the winning. He said the Spurs were synonymous with winning, and that on the lottery night, when San Antonio got that first pick, he felt lucky it was them. Not because of the city, not because of the market, because of the culture, because of the 5 championship banners and the decades of organizational stability in the front office that had consistently found ways to keep winning long after most franchises would have declined. He said on the night he was drafted that the Spurs were synonymous with winning. And he said it the way someone says it when they have studied it, when they have thought about it, when they have already decided they want to be part of it. When Wembanyama did not stumble into that understanding, he arrived with it fully formed. He arrived to San Antonio and immediately validated every word of the hype. In his first season, he led the league in blocks per game. In his second season, he led the league in blocks per game again. In his third season, the year before this contract extension, he did it a third consecutive time, finished third in MVP voting, and won the Defensive Player of the Year award unanimously, the only unanimous DPI in league history. He averaged 25 points, 11.5 rebounds, 3 blocks, and a steal per game while shooting over 50% from the field. He also led the Spurs to 62 wins in the second seed in the Western Conference, then carried them through 7 brutal games against the Oklahoma City Thunder in the Western Conference Finals, winning unanimous WCF MVP honors with 27 points and nearly 11 rebounds per game. He took San Antonio to the NBA Finals for the first time since 2014. The Spurs lost to the New York Knicks in 5 games, but nobody walked away from that series doubting what they had in their building. When Wembanyama averaged 26 points, 11 rebounds, and 3.5 blocks per game in the finals in just his third season in the league, Victor Wembanyama is the face of the NBA. He told Nike executives before that season that he was not going to give basketball a choice about who the face was going to be. He was right. So when the Spurs sat down to negotiate his rookie-scale maximum contract extension this summer, everyone expected it to be straightforward. Give him the biggest number allowed, get it signed, announce it, move on. The Spurs offered exactly that. According to ESPN's San Antonio, San Antonio offered one the full supermax in multiple different contract variations during negotiations. They wanted him to have every dollar he was entitled to. They put the supermax on the table and left it there for him. Wembanyama and his representatives went through multiple frameworks with the organization over an extended period. And when the process concluded, Wembanyama signed a 5-year, $252 million maximum rookie-scale contract extension with a player option in the 5th season. The number sounds enormous because it is enormous. But the real story of this contract is not what it contains, it is what it does not. Here is where it gets interesting. The contract Wembanyama signed represents a standard 25% rookie maximum extension based on a projected salary cap. Under the NBA's collective bargaining agreement, there is a separate tier of contract that elite players can access called the designated player extension, commonly known as the Supermax, or the Rolls Rule. If a player wins an MVP award, earns a spot on the All-NBA team, or wins Defensive Player of the Year, they become eligible for a contract starting at 30% of the salary cap rather than 25%. When Wembanyama won a Defensive Player of the Year award unanimously this season, the door to that 30% escalator was open, the Spurs offered it to him. He closed the door himself. Based on ESPN salary cap analyst Bobby Marks's projections, the difference between a 25% contract and the 30% Supermax works out to roughly $51 million over the life of the deal. Wembanyama's first year on the extension will pay him $43.5 million. Had he taken the Supermax, that first-year value would have climbed to approximately $52 million. Multiply those differences across 5 seasons and you understand the scale of what he turned down. This was not a rounding error. This was a deliberate choice to leave $51 million on the table. Now, the question everyone wanted answered. Why? Why would the best player on the planet, a 22-year-old with his entire prime ahead of him, choose not to take every dollar available to him? It is a question that would not have needed to be asked about most players. Most players take the biggest number on the table and let the front office figure out the rest. That is the conventional wisdom. And for most of NBA history, it has been the norm. When Wembanyama broke from it, San Antonio provided the clearest window into his thinking. He reported that San Antonio worked in close partnership with Wembanyama and his representatives, offering the 4 Supermax and different variations of extensions, but that Wembanyama ultimately chose a contract sacrifice rooted in giving him and the organization increased ability to build a sustained title contender around him. There it is, the word sacrifice is in there deliberately. This was not a financial oversight. It was a philosophical decision. When Wembanyama did not want more money, he wanted more weapons. He watched the Knicks celebrate a championship on the Frostbank Center Court, and he walked off that floor with a singular focus on what it would take to make sure that never happened again. And he understood that the best investment he could make in his own future was not a larger contract, but a more dangerous roster. To understand why that logic holds up, you have to understand how the NBA salary cap actually works, and why one superstar contract can quietly reshape a franchise's flexibility for years. The NBA operates under a system of escalating financial penalties designed to discourage teams from spending beyond certain thresholds. Teams that exceed the salary cap lose access to key exceptions that allow them to sign players at above minimum salaries. Further up sits the luxury tax line, where every dollar spent beyond the threshold cost an additional tax dollar paid back to the league. Above that is the second apron, where the restrictions become severe enough to fundamentally change how a front office can operate. Teams above it lose the ability to aggregate salaries and trades, face limitations on which exceptions they can use, and essentially find themselves locked into their rosters with almost no ability to improve from the outside. Under the current collective bargaining agreement, these rules are more restrictive than at any previous point in league history. The difference between a 25% deal and a 30% deal cascaded through the cap for years. Every dollar saved at the top of the payroll is a dollar that can go toward the second star. The role players, the championship pieces that make deep playoff runs possible. Think about what $51 million means in that context. That is the difference between signing 2 elite role players or watching them walk in free agency. It is the difference between keeping your young core together or losing your third best player because you ran out of room. It is the difference between staying below the second apron and falling into the league's most punishing financial restrictions. In the NBA's current economic environment, $51 million in salary cap flexibility is not a minor detail. It is a roster-authoring number. And when Wembanyama gave it to the Spurs without hesitation, the Spurs have a roster approaching a period of compounding financial commitments. The Aaron Fox is already locked into a 4-year extension that will pay him nearly $50 million annually in the later years of the deal. Sven Castle, who averaged 16 points, 5 rebounds, and 7 assists this past season while taking a massive developmental leap, becomes extension eligible next summer. Dylan Harper, the second overall pick in the 2025 draft, becomes extension eligible in 2028. Both are expected to command maximum or near maximum contracts when their time comes. When you stack the financial feature of that core alongside Fox's deal, the math gets complicated quickly. Every dollar of flexibility Wembanyama creates at the top of the payroll makes the difference between the Spurs keeping that entire group together or being forced into painful decisions about who stays and who goes. His willingness to earn less is not charity. It is architecture. He is engineering the conditions for a dynasty before his career has barely started. The Jalen Brunson comparison has come up repeatedly in coverage of this decision, and for good reason. Brunson is the most prominent recent example of a star player voluntarily accepting a significant discount in the name of team construction. When he extended with the New York Knicks in 2024, he chose a 4-year $156.5 million deal rather than waiting for a 5-year $269 million contract the following summer. The discount allowed the Knicks to complete the trades that brought OG, Anunoby, and Mikal Bridges to New York. Brunson was the third highest paid player on his own championship team. Most stars with his level of production would never agree to that structure. To put it plainly, Brunson walked away from over $100 million in potential earnings at the peak of his market value and trusted that the players the Knicks could sign with their flexibility would make the sacrifice worth it. He was right. The Knicks won the championship and Brunson walked away with a ring and a Finals MVP award with 45 points in the clinching game. Nobody is questioning the financial decision now, but Brunson understood something that not every elite player has been willing to accept. Individual wealth and team success are sometimes in direct competition, and choosing between them requires a clarity about priorities that most people spend their entire careers avoiding. Brunson chose his teammates. The result was a championship. When Wembanyama watched that celebration from the other, he saw exactly what team-first contract philosophy looks like when it works. And now he is applying the same framework to his own situation, at a younger age with a longer runway ahead of him. But the comparison that carries the most weight in San Antonio is not Brunson, it is Tim Duncan. What Wembanyama is doing this summer echoes something Duncan did over and over across 19 seasons with the Spurs. Duncan cut his salary from over $21 million annually to just $9.5 million in 2012, nearly cutting his pay in half so the Spurs could retain their core and add necessary depth for another championship run. 3 years later in 2015, Duncan signed a 2-year deal worth just $10.4 million total. That bargain allowed San Antonio to sign LaMarcus Aldridge to a maximum contract, retain Danny Green, and bring in David West. Duncan was a first-ballot Hall of Famer with 5 rings. And he was earning $5 million in the final seasons of his career because he wanted to compete for another championship more than he wanted another digit on his bank statement. Nobody looks back at that choice and questions it. What made Duncan's approach so powerful was not just the dollar amounts he sacrificed. It was the organizational culture those sacrifices created. When the best player on the team consistently put winning ahead of personal earnings, it sent the message to every player in the locker room and every player the Spurs were recruiting. LaMarcus Aldridge took less to sign with San Antonio. Danny Green took below market to stay. David West gave up $11 million just to be part of a championship chase under that roof. That culture was built through choices Duncan made repeatedly across 2 decades. And now Wembanyama is the inheritor of that culture, he is not accepting it passively as tradition. He is actively extending it with his own contract at 22 years old, before he has a single championship ring, before he has spent a decade in the league, before the financial security that would make a sacrifice like this feel comfortable. He is doing it now because he understands what Tim Duncan understood. Winning requires everyone to pull in the same direction, and that starts at the top. Wembanyama did not just accidentally land at a franchise built on this principle, he sought it out intentionally. When he was drafted in 2023, he told reporters the Spurs were synonymous with winning. He said on the lottery night, when San Antonio got that first pick, he felt lucky it was them. Not because of the city, not because of the market size, because of the winning culture, because of everything those 5 championship banners represented, because of the organization's track record of developing players and sustaining excellence longer than anyone in the modern era had managed to do. After San Antonio beat Oklahoma City in 7 brutal games and pushed their ticket to the finals, he described winning the Larry O'Brien as the meaning of his life. Those words, the meaning of his life. That is not something most 22-year-old athletes say, because most have not arrived at that kind of clarity yet. Wembanyama has always had it. He has never been confused about what he is here to do. After the finals loss to the Knicks, he sat in front of reporters and called it the biggest lesson of his life, the biggest learning moment. He said the margin of error at this level is very thin, and that their mistakes were being punished so hard they could not afford to keep making them. He dissected the series without bitterness, without excuses, with the analytical mindset of someone already thinking about how to be better next time. He was not talking about money. He was talking about winning. He has described the Spurs openly as his franchise and told French outlet Liet that it is obviously his dream to spend his entire career with a single franchise here in San Antonio. The day his extension was agreed to, he posted 7 words. Spurs family, I'm here to stay. Whatever it takes. He meant every word of it literally. The reaction around the NBA was immediate. League observers almost universally praised the decision as an example of maturity that is genuinely rare in professional sports, let alone from a 22-year-old. Sports Illustrated called it a selfless decision that handed the Spurs a ton of flexibility. Bleacher Report noted how critical the cap savings would be as a team prepares to lock up Castle in Harbor. Spurs fans who had watched the organization's championship culture feel like a distant memory over the 5 seasons before Wembanyama arrived reacted with open joy, not just because their superstar is staying, but because he is staying on terms that position the franchise to build something lasting around him. The broader fan reaction across the league was also telling when Wembanyama's post went viral almost instantly. The phrase, whatever it takes, resonated beyond San Antonio because people understood what it meant coming from a player who had just turned down $51 million to back it up. There is a counterpoint worth acknowledging. Some financial analysts and player advocacy voices have raised questions about whether any athlete should voluntarily forego guaranteed earnings given the unpredictable nature of professional sports careers. Wembanyama missed significant time in his second season with a blood clot issue. Injuries happen without warning. From that perspective, leaving guaranteed money behind always carries risk. But Wembanyama clearly weighed that risk against his competitive goals and made a decision rooted in where his values actually sit. He is betting on himself to stay healthy, stay dominant, and eventually win the championship. That makes the sacrifice feel like the most rational decision he ever made. The NBA is currently in an era of extraordinary parity. A new champion has been crowned in each of the last 8 seasons. No team has successfully built the kind of sustained dynasty that defined the Spurs of the Duncan era, or the Warriors at their peak. Part of that is the current CBA, which has deliberately made it harder for wealthy teams to keep spinning their way to championships through heavy luxury tax investment. Part of it is the increased depth across the entire league. But the teams that have consistently remained relevant during this era have done so by maximizing every available dollar of cap flexibility and making intelligent decisions at the roster construction level before the season starts. The Knicks built their championship roster precisely because Brunson gave them room to move at a critical moment. The Spurs now have room to move because Wemby just did the same thing in an era where second apron restrictions punish excess, and every roster decision compounds forward over multiple years. A franchise player choosing to earn less is not just a feel-good story. It is a genuine competitive advantage. And a franchise best positioned to use that advantage intelligently is the one that has been doing exactly this since the 1990s. Championships are the primary measuring stick for NBA greatness. And winning a championship requires building the right team around you. The players who are remembered as all-time greats without rings or cautionary tales, not inspirations. Charles Barkley never won one. Karl Malone never won one. Chris Paul never won one. Despite spending 2 decades as one of the most gifted point guards the game has ever produced. Their individual brilliance was never in doubt. But the absence of a title permanently colors how history evaluates everything they did. It is the first thing mentioned and the last thing remembered. Wembanyama is doing everything within his power to make sure that conversation never applies to him. He is putting his money literally where his mouth is. He is 22 years old. He is the best player in the world. He just turned down $51 million because he understood that the money was not the point. The ring is the point. It has always been the point. And he is arranging every decision in his career, including the financial ones, around that single goal. That is not normal for a player his age. That is not normal for a player at any age. It is the kind of thinking that, when combined with his physical gifts, makes it very easy to believe that the San Antonio Spurs are going to win multiple championships before this era is over. There is one more dimension to this that deserves attention. Wembanyama is doing this at 22, not at 35, when a pay cut carries less financial risk, not after winning multiple championships, when the reins provide some compensation for the dollars left behind. He is doing it at the very start of his earning window, before the financial security that comes from a decade in the league. That takes a different kind of conviction than what Duncan demonstrated at the twilight of his career. It requires a 22-year-old to look at $51 million sitting right in front of him and say no. His reasoning, as reported by Charania, was about giving himself and the organization the ability to build a sustained title contender. Sustained, not just one window. A decade of contention. He is not thinking about next season. He is thinking about the next 10 years, about the roster that is going to be standing next to him when the Spurs finally hoisted Larry O'Brien again. That is the scale on which he operates, and that is why the basketball world is paying attention. At the end of this offseason, what Victor Wembanyama did is going to be talked about in San Antonio for a long time. He could have taken the Supermax. The Spurs offered it. He turned it down and chose a contract that gives his franchise a flexibility to surround him with what he needs to finish what he started this past June. He could have pocketed the extra $51 million and nobody would have blamed him. Players maximize their earnings. That is the expectation. That is what the system is built around. Instead, he looked at the bigger picture, at the roster that needs to be built around him, at the players that still need to be added, at the championships that are still waiting to be won. And he made a decision that the most decorated franchise in the modern era would recognize immediately. He ended his finals press conference with his eyes pointed forward toward the next game, toward the next challenge, toward the thing he has said out loud as the meaning of his life. The championship has not arrived yet, but you watch the way he is setting up the next 5 years. The way he is already playing the long game at 22, while most players his age are still figuring out what they want, and it becomes very difficult to bet against him. When Wembanyama left $51 million on the table, in exchange, he is betting that San Antonio gets everything they need to go get the one thing that actually matters to him. Drop your thoughts in the comments on whether you think he made the right call. And if you are not subscribed, do that now because this first team under Wembanyama is going to be one of the most compelling stories in the league for years to come. You do not want to miss what is.